Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku took over as Nightwing and led the Bat family? Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The rain over Bloodhaven was a black, greasy curtain, and it tasted of chemicals and despair. It fell on the burning husks of cargo containers at the docks, hissing as it met the flames that licked greedily at the night sky. The air was a cacophony of screaming sirens, the thudding bass of heavy-duty explosions, and the sharp, staccato crack of automatic gunfire. For the Bat family, it was just another Tuesday, a Tuesday that had gone catastrophically wrong. Robin, report! Status on the east perimeter! Batman's voice, a gravelly command stripped of all warmth, crackled over the comms. It was a voice honed by years of projecting authority, but tonight, it was frayed at the edges, stretched thin by a city on fire and a team that was anything but. The perimeter is compromised. Damian Wayne snapped back, his voice the petulant snarl of a prince forced to acknowledge a flaw in his kingdom. The hired guns are better equipped than anticipated. I am engaging. Negative, Robin. Fall back to the designated rally point. Red Hood, where are you? A burst of static, followed by the sound of a gunshot and a grunt. Playing whack-a-mole with some of Blockbuster's goons a click south of you, B. They're trying to blow the bridge. Seems your little party has a few after-parties planned. Jason Todd's voice was laced with its usual sardonic bite, but even he couldn't fully mask the strain. From the heart of the maelstrom, a flash of blue and black moved with a fluid grace that defied the chaos around it. Nightwing, Dick Grayson, flipped over a charging brute, his eskrima sticks a blur as they struck nerve clusters in the man's neck and shoulders, sending him crumpling to the wet asphalt. He flowed into the next movement, sweeping the legs out from under a gunman before disarming him with a precise, almost elegant twist of the wrist. He was the eye of the storm, a center of focused calm. But the storm was winning. Oracle, I need an update on the primary device, Dick said, his breathing only slightly ragged as he vaulted over a flaming crate. The one at the shipping hub. They're drawing us out, keeping us busy on the fringes. I'm trying, Nightwing. Barbara Gordon's voice was a tense wire from the clock tower, the rapid clicking of her keyboard an undercurrent to her words. Their tech guy is good. He's running ghost protocols, bouncing signals off a dozen dead drops. Every time I get close, he's gone. But I can confirm, the main device is still active. Thermal imaging shows a massive energy signature. Timer is, oh god. Dick, it's under 2 minutes. This wasn't just a smash and grab. It was coordinated, meticulous. Firefly's pyromaniacs provided the distraction, Blockbuster's men provided the muscle, and some unseen ghost in the machine was orchestrating it all, turning their greatest strength, their communication and tactical prowess, against them. They were separated, harried, and losing control. I see it, Nightwing said, his eyes narrowing as he landed atop a crane, the rain plastering his dark hair to his brow. Below him, nestled between a row of volatile chemical tanks, was a makeshift bomb, a horrifying tangle of wires and high-yield explosives lashed to a central generator. Worse, a city bus, its tires shot out, was stalled right beside it. Panicked faces, illuminated by the flashing red light of the timer, were pressed against the windows. I'm going in, he stated, a calm finality in his tone. Dick, no! Bruce's command was immediate, sharp with an emotion he rarely let through. The blast radius is too wide. Get out of there. That's an order, and let them die. Dick's voice was quiet, but it cut through the calm line, silencing everyone. Not tonight, Bruce. Not ever. He dropped from the crane, a shadow descending into hell. He moved with a desperate, beautiful speed. One eskrima stick shattered the bus door's glass. Everybody out. Now! Go! He yelled, his voice a beacon of assurance in the terror. He began pulling people out, a crying child, an elderly woman, a man frozen in fear. He was a whirlwind of motion, pushing them towards the relative safety of a concrete barrier. 30 seconds, Dick. Barbara's voice was a choked whisper. He had one last person, a teenage girl caught by a piece of shrapnel in her leg. He scooped her into his arms, his muscles straining. The timer on the bomb glared at him. 15. 14. He threw her over his shoulder, a fireman's carry, and ran. He could feel the heat of the generator on his back, hear the high-pitched whine of the device reaching its crescendo. "Damien, get to the bridge! Jason, hold your position!" Bruce was barking orders, trying to salvage something, anything, from the unfolding disaster. Dick didn't hear him. He heard only the girl's terrified sobs and the ticking of the clock in his head. He threw her behind the barrier, shielding her with his own body as he landed. 10, 9, 8. He looked up. He could see the flash of a red cape in the distance. He could hear Robin's grappling hook. They were coming. They were always coming. A small smile touched his lips. 3, 2, 1. The world dissolved into white-hot light and a sound that tore the sky apart. The force of the explosion was a physical fist, picking Nightwing up and slamming him against the concrete wall. The shrapnel from the chemical tanks, superheated and razor-sharp, shredded the reinforced material of his suit like it was paper. The last thing that registered on the Bat family's comms was a single, sharp intake of breath, followed by an abyss of perfect, horrifying silence. Izuku Midoriya, known to a different world as the hero Deku, knew the taste of his own blood better than he knew the taste of a peaceful meal. He coughed, a racking, painful spasm that sent a spray of crimson against the cracked pavement. His arm was almost certainly broken, and he was fairly sure he had at least 3 fractured ribs. The villain, a wiry man calling himself Vortex, cackled from across the rubble-strewn street. "What's the matter, Ninth?" Vortex taunted, his hands glowing with a sickening, purple-black energy. "Can't keep up? All that power, and you're still just a boy trying to fill shoes a million sizes too big." Izuku pushed himself to his feet, ignoring the screaming protest of his body. The war was over, but the cleanup was a war in itself. Villains, emboldened by the chaos, were crawling from the woodwork. Vortex's quirk was a nightmare. He could create unstable, short-range dimensional tears, turning solid ground into a pitfall and the air itself into a slicing weapon. Danger sense is screaming, he thought, the familiar prickling sensation at the base of his skull a constant, agonizing thrum. "Be careful, Ninth!" A distant, echoing voice whispered in his mind. The vestiges of One for All were a constant presence, a council of ghosts in his soul. "His power is chaotic. It doesn't just cut space, it shreds it." "I know," Izuku muttered, activating full cowling at 30%. Green lightning, a familiar and comforting storm, erupted around him. He needed to end this quickly. His stamina was still shot from the war. He launched himself forward, a green blur. He used float to kick off the side of a half-demolished building, angling himself above Vortex. As he descended, he sent out a tendril of black whip, aiming not for the man, but for a piece of rebar sticking out of the ground behind him. Vortex, anticipating a direct assault, opened a shimmering tear in the air directly in Izuku's path. But Izuku was already changing his trajectory, using Black Whip as a pivot point. He swung around the portal, his feet connecting solidly with the villain's back. Vortex stumbled, but a malicious grin spread across his face. "Got you!" The rebar Izuku was anchored to suddenly dissolved into a swirling vortex of purple energy. The Black Whip tendril was sucked in, and with it, Izuku was violently yanked off balance. He felt a horrifying pull, a force of nature that his 30% output couldn't fight. Danger sense wasn't just screaming anymore. It was a soul-tearing shriek of absolute, imminent catastrophe. He was being dragged toward a new, much larger portal that had opened up behind him. It wasn't a clean cut in reality like the others. This one was jagged, unstable, spitting sparks of raw, multicolored energy. It looked like a wound in the world. "Let's see where this one goes." Vortex laughed, his control clearly slipping. "Maybe it's a nice beach. Or maybe it's the inside of a star. Bye-bye, symbol of hope." Izuku clawed at the ground, his fingers digging into asphalt, but the portal's gravity was immense. He could feel the connection to the vestiges flickering, stretching thin like a frayed rope. The world around him began to warp, the colors bleeding together, the sounds of the city distorting into an electronic wail. "No, not like this," he thought, a surge of panic warring with his resolve. Uraraka. Ida. Kaken. All Might. His grip failed. With a final, desperate cry that was swallowed by the void, Izuku Midoriya was pulled into the collapsing portal. The world dissolved. There was no light, no sound, only the sensation of being utterly unmade. He was falling through a kaleidoscope of impossible colors, his body stretching and compressing. The voices of the vestiges faded into static, then into silence. For the first time since he had inherited One for All, he was truly, completely alone. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it ended. Reality slammed back into him with the force of a physical blow. He was spat out, tumbling through the air for a brief, disorienting moment before crashing hard into something soft and foul-smelling. He landed in a pile of garbage bags, the impact knocking the last of the air from his already abused lungs. The Batcave was colder and quieter than it had ever been. The usual hum of the bat computer, the drip of water from the cavern roof, the screech of the resident bats. They were all still there, but they were now sounds of a tomb. They were background noise to a silence so profound, so heavy, it felt like it was crushing the air from the room. In the center of the main platform, in the state-of-the-art medical bay, Dick Grayson lay still. He was a landscape of bandages and tubes, his face pale and serene under the harsh medical lights. A steady, rhythmic beat from the heart monitor was the only sign that he was still alive. It was a sound of life that felt more like a countdown. Bruce Wayne sat at the computer, but he wasn't working. The cowl was off, resting on the console beside him, but the mask of Batman was firmly in place. His face was a chiseled slab of granite, his eyes fixed on a replaying loop of security footage from Bloodhaven. He watched the explosion, the white-hot flash, the way the shockwave had thrown his son's body like a ragdoll. He watched it again. And again. He was looking for a mistake, a miscalculation, his miscalculation, the one that had put Dick in that bed. Damien stood at the training area, his small frame rigid with a rage that was too big for his body. He wasn't training. He was brutalizing the practice dummy, his movements stripped of their usual fluid precision. They were jagged, furious. Each strike of his katana was a curse. A strike for his own failure to be faster. A strike for Todd's cavalier attitude. A strike for his father's impossible orders. A final, shuddering strike for the brother who had dared to get himself broken. The blade bit deep into the dummy's synthetic flesh, and Damien stood there, panting, his shoulders heaving. "He will wake up," he said, not to anyone in particular, but to the cave itself. It was not a statement of hope. It was a command, issued to a universe that refused to listen. From the main console, a holographic screen shimmered to life. Barbara's face appeared, her expression drawn and tired. "His vitals are stable, but—" "Bruce, the doctors at Leslie Tompkins' clinic confirmed my analysis. The shrapnel from the chemical tanks was coated in a custom neurotoxin. It's not lethal, but it's designed to induce and prolong a comatose state. We don't know when he'll wake up. It could be weeks. It could be—" She couldn't bring herself to finish the sentence. Bruce didn't turn. He just kept watching the explosion. "Find out who designed it. I'm already working on it," she said softly. "Bruce, talk to me. There's nothing to say," he bit out. "Work the problem. Damien is the problem. You are the problem." Damien whirled around, his face contorted with grief and fury, tears shimmering in his emerald eyes. "You told him to stand down. You let him go in alone. You let this happen. That is enough, Damien." Bruce's voice was dangerously low. "No, it is not." Damien stalked forward, jabbing a finger towards the unmoving figure in the medical bay. "He is the light, Father. He is the best of us, and you sat here, behind your screen, and you let his light go out." Before Bruce could respond, a calm, steady voice cut through the tension, carrying the weight of decades of quiet authority. "Master Damien, that is quite enough." Alfred Pennyworth stood at the edge of the platform, a tray with a steaming teapot and 2 cups in his hands. His face was etched with a deep, weary sorrow, but his posture was, as always, impeccable. He placed the tray on a nearby console. "Blaming your father will not help Master Richard recover any faster," he said, his voice gentle but firm. He looked at Bruce's rigid back. "And nor, I might add, will re-watching the events as if you can somehow alter the past through sheer force of will." Bruce finally turned, his blue eyes as cold and empty as a winter sky. "I gave him an order, Alfred, and he made a choice," Alfred countered, stepping closer. The choice of a hero. The choice you taught him to make. He saved an entire bus full of people. You cannot honor his sacrifice by tearing his family apart in the aftermath. The words hung in the air, thick and uncomfortable. Damien looked away, his anger deflating into visible misery. Bruce's jaw tightened, a muscle feathering along the bone. Bloodhaven is asking questions, Barbara said, trying to steer them back to logistics, to something they could control. The media is reporting Nightwing is MIA, possibly dead. The criminals in the city are already getting bold. They can smell the blood in the water. We need a plan. We need to project strength. There is no strength, Damien muttered, turning his back on them all. Not without him. Bruce stood up, his massive frame seeming to suck all the light and hope from the room. He walked over to the medical bay and stood over his first son. He reached out a hand, hesitating for a moment before gently brushing a stray lock of black hair from Dick's forehead. It was a gesture of such uncharacteristic tenderness that it made the scene all the more heartbreaking. Gotham cannot lose Batman, he said, his voice a low rumble. And Bloodhaven cannot lose its protector. The symbol is more important than the man. He turned back to the console, his face once again an unreadable mask of stone. Nightwing will be seen on patrol tonight. Barbara and Damien stared at him, aghast. What are you talking about? Barbara demanded. Who is going to be in that suit? You can't be serious, TT. You would dare put an imposter in his uniform? Damien scoffed, utterly scandalized. Who would be so foolish as to even attempt it? Bruce didn't answer. He simply stared at the city surveillance feeds on the main screen, his mind already calculating, moving on. The family was broken. The mission remained. That was the only thing that mattered. Alfred watched him, a profound sadness in his eyes. He picked up the tray, the untouched tea now cold, and turned to ascend the stairs back to the manor. The boys, he thought, were lost in their own pain. Someone had to keep the world turning. He had an errand to run in the city, a prescription to pick up for Master Richard's care. A small, mundane task, a sliver of normalcy in a world that had tilted off its axis. Izuku's first coherent thought was rain. It was cold, relentless, and it smelled wrong. Not like the clean, fresh rain of Muzurifu, but heavy, thick with the scent of exhaust fumes, wet pavement, and something acrid, like old rot. He pushed himself up, hissing as a jolt of pure agony shot up his arm. It was definitely broken. The pain was a sharp, white-hot anchor in the sea of his confusion. He was in a narrow alleyway, flanked by towering brick buildings that seemed to lean in, blotting out what little light the perpetually overcast sky offered. Graffiti covered every surface, angry slashes of color in languages he didn't recognize. A flickering neon sign from the main street cast a lurid red glow over the scene. The sign read Paul's Diner. The lettering was English. English? He staggered to his feet, leaning against the cold, damp brick wall for support. He took stock of himself. His hero costume was shredded, offering little protection from the chill. His mask was gone. He was weaponless, injured, and utterly, terrifyingly lost. He tried to reach inward, to the warm, sunlit space in his soul where the vestiges of one for all resided. He found only a faint, flickering ember. The connection was there, but it was strained, distant, as if he were trying to shout across a vast and empty ocean. He could feel a sliver of the power, but it felt foreign, sluggish, like trying to move a limb that had fallen asleep. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prick at the edges of his consciousness. Where was he? How did he get here? Was Vortex here? Were his friends okay? A sudden, high-pitched scream from the street outside sliced through his spiraling thoughts. His hero instincts, honed and ingrained deeper than bone, took over. The pain, the confusion, the fear, it all vanished, replaced by a singular, driving purpose. Someone is in trouble. He stumbled out of the alley, his eyes struggling to adjust to the streetlights shimmering on the wet road. He saw it instantly, a small girl, no older than 6, with a red raincoat and pigtails, standing frozen in the middle of the street. She had dropped a small, stuffed bear and had run back for it. Now, she was staring, mesmerized, into the blinding headlights of a speeding sedan. The driver, distracted, was going far too fast for the wet conditions. There was no time to think. No time to analyze. No time for a plan. The world slowed to a crawl. Izuku's mind calculated the distances in a heartbeat. Car 30 meters, speed approximate 80 kilometers per hour. Girl 20 meters from me. Impact in 1.3 seconds. He pushed off the wall. He tried to summon full cowling, but the power sputtered, refusing to coalesce. He felt like he was trying to start a flooded engine. There was nothing there. No! Move! He screamed at his own body. Desperation fueled him. He poured every ounce of his will, every shred of his focus, into his legs. He felt a tiny spark of one for all catch. It wasn't a storm of green lightning. It was a flicker, a single, painful pop of energy, one for all 2%. Even at that minuscule output, the power was agony. Without the full, symbiotic connection to the vestiges, it felt like pouring acid into his muscles. He heard a sickening crack from his ankle as the bone fractured under the unnatural strain, but he didn't stop. To the girl and the horrified onlookers, he was a blur of green and black. A ghost. He covered the 20 meters in less than a second, scooping the child into his arms, her small body trembling. He used his momentum to pivot, tucking her head protectively against his chest as he rolled, absorbing the impact with his already battered body. They skidded to a stop on the slick pavement just as the sedan screeched past, its horn blaring, missing them by inches. Izuku lay on the ground, the little girl safe in his arms, the rain washing over his face. He could hear the sound of people shouting, the mother's frantic cries as she ran towards them. He gently pushed the child towards the sound of her mother's voice. "It's okay," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "You're safe now." The adrenaline faded, and the pain came back with a vengeance. His broken arm, his fractured ribs, his shattered ankle, it all crashed down on him at once. The faint ember of one for all within him was extinguished, leaving him feeling hollow and cold. Black spots danced in his vision. The sounds of the city faded into a dull roar. His last conscious thought was a fleeting image of All Might's smiling face, a memory from a world that suddenly felt a lifetime away. Then, the darkness took him. He didn't see the sleek, black Bentley that pulled to a quiet stop a few feet away. He didn't see the elderly man with the kind, worried eyes who stepped out into the rain, an umbrella snapping open above his head. Alfred Pennyworth stood over the unconscious boy, taking in the scene with a practiced, analytical gaze that had missed very little in his long life. He saw the impossible speed, the self-destructive act of pure heroism. He saw the shredded, unfamiliar costume. He saw the mop of green-black hair plastered to the boy's forehead, and the freckles scattered across his young, pain-lined face. He looked nothing like Richard, or Jason, or Damien. And yet, there was something in the sheer, reckless abandon of his sacrifice that was achingly familiar. It was the same fire he had seen in all of his boys, the fire that had just been so terribly dimmed in the one who now lay broken in the cave below. Alfred knelt, his old knees protesting against the cold, wet ground. He felt for a pulse, finding it weak but steady. The mother was thanking him, crying her gratitude, but he barely heard her. His full attention was on the mysterious, injured boy who had fallen from the sky. "Well now," Alfred murmured softly to himself, the rain pattering on his umbrella. "This is not what I was expecting." He reached for his phone, his movements calm and efficient. "A little help here would be most appreciated." The first thing Izuku Midoriya registered was the beeping. It was a soft, steady, rhythmic sound, the polar opposite of the chaotic cacophony of his last waking moments. It was the sound of order, of monitoring, of calm. It was a sound that meant he was alive. The second thing he registered was the texture of the sheets against his skin. They were impossibly soft, with a thread count his mind couldn't even begin to quantify. They smelled faintly of lavender and clean linen. A far cry from the foul-smelling garbage bags and rain-slicked asphalt of the alley. His eyes fluttered open. The ceiling above him was not the stained plaster of a hospital room but was instead fashioned from dark, ornate wood, intricately carved with patterns that seemed to draw the eye inward. The light in the room was dim, filtering in through heavy, velvet curtains drawn across a tall, mullioned window. He was in a bed that could have comfortably slept three of him, propped up on pillows that felt like clouds. An IV drip was neatly taped to the back of his hand, feeding a clear fluid into his veins. Panic, a familiar and unwelcome companion, tried to claw its way up his throat. He tried to sit up, move his body immediately, and violently protested. A white-hot lance of pain shot through his left arm, which he now saw was encased in a sleek, black cast from his knuckles to his shoulder. An even deeper, crushing ache radiated from his ribs, stealing his breath. "Easy now, son," a calm, British voice said from beside him. "You've sustained considerable trauma. Hasty movements would be most inadvisable." Izuku turned his head slowly. Sitting in a plush armchair by his bedside was the elderly man from his fading memories. He was impeccably dressed in a simple but perfectly tailored black suit, his silver hair neatly combed, his posture ramrod straight even while seated. He held a book in his lap, but his attention was entirely on Izuku, his gaze sharp and intelligent, yet tinged with a gentle concern that set Izuku slightly at ease. Where am I?" Izuku's voice was a dry rasp. "You are in the Master Infirmary of Wayne Manor," the man replied, setting his book aside and rising. He moved with a quiet efficiency, pouring a glass of water from a crystal carafe on the bedside table. "My name is Alfred Pennyworth. I am the acting butler of this estate. And you, master?" He paused, leaving the question hanging in the air. "Midoriya," Izuku managed, struggling to push himself up slightly. "Izuku Midoriya." Alfred offered him the glass, helping him hold it steady. The cool water was the most wonderful thing Izuku had ever tasted. "A pleasure to make your acquaintance, Master Midoriya, under less than ideal circumstances. You have been unconscious for 2 days. 2 days. The information hit Izuku like a physical blow. 2 days in a world that wasn't his. His friends, his mentors, the entire world he fought for, they would think he was dead. A fresh wave of despair washed over him, so potent it was almost nauseating. "The girl," Izuku said, the memory cutting through his haze. "The little girl in the street. Is she okay?" A small, genuine smile touched Alfred's lips. It softened the lines of worry around his eyes. "She is perfectly fine, thanks to you. Her mother has been calling every news station in the city, describing a green-haired angel who appeared out of nowhere. You have become something of a local mystery." Izuku sank back into the pillows, a small measure of relief warring with his overwhelming confusion. That was good. That was one thing that had gone right. "You took quite a risk, Master Midoriya," Alfred continued, his tone shifting from gentle to something more probing. "The doctors I brought in were perplexed. You have a severely fractured ulna and radius in your left arm, a compound fracture of the left tibia, 3 broken ribs, and extensive deep tissue bruising across your entire body. And yet, the fractures show signs of mending at a rate they deemed biologically unprecedented. Furthermore, your musculature is denser than any athlete they have ever recorded. They found traces of old, layered scarring on your arms and hands, consistent with years of repeated, explosive trauma." Alfred's eyes met his, and there was no hiding from their analytical depth. "Who are you, young man?" Izuku's mind raced. What could he possibly say? "I'm from another dimension where 80% of the population has superpowers called quirks, and I inherited the collective power of 8 previous heroes to fight a supervillain who wants to steal it. They wouldn't just think he was crazy, they'd lock him in a padded room for the rest of his life," he stammered, searching for a plausible lie. I've been through a lot. An accident when I was younger, an accident that allows you to move faster than a speeding car?" A new voice cut through the room. The voice was low, gravelly, like stones grinding together at the bottom of a dark ravine. It came from the shadows in the corner of the room, a corner Izuku could have sworn was empty a moment ago. A figure detached itself from the darkness, and the atmosphere in the room changed instantly. The temperature seemed to drop. The comfortable silence became a heavy, charged presence. The man who stepped into the dim light was immense, not just in height but in the sheer breadth of his shoulders. He was dressed in a simple black sweater and dark pants, but he wore them like armor. His face was a mask of stern, handsome features, with a sharp jaw and piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through Izuku's flesh and into his soul. But it was the weight of him, the aura of barely contained power and profound, soul-deep sorrow that truly commanded the room. Izuku had stood before All Might at his weakest and All for One at his strongest, and this man's presence was a different beast entirely. It was the crushing gravity of a black hole. "I am Bruce Wayne," the man said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "This is my home. You saved a child's life on my city's streets. I want to know how." Izuku swallowed, his throat suddenly bone dry again. He could feel the man's gaze dissecting him, analyzing his posture, his breathing, the flicker of his eyes. This wasn't a man you could lie to. Izuku had spent years analyzing heroes, and he knew, with every fiber of his being, that the man standing before him was more than just a concerned billionaire. He made a choice. The truth. The unbelievable, insane, impossible truth. It was all he had left. "My name is Izuku Midoriya," he began, his voice shaky but resolute. "And I'm not from here. I'm not from this world." He explained everything. He spoke of a world transformed by the sudden emergence of quirks, of the dawn of the age of heroes and villains. He spoke of being born quirkless in a world of powers, of his burning desire to save people with a smile, just like his idol, All Might. He told them about One for All, the sacred torch passed down through generations, a quirk that stockpiled power. He spoke of his master, of the Great War, of the villain named Vortex and the unstable portal. As he spoke, he watched their faces. Alfred listened with a quiet, unwavering attentiveness, his expression unreadable but not dismissive. Bruce Wayne remained a statue of stone-faced skepticism, his arms crossed over his massive chest. "Superpowers?" Bruce said flatly when Izuku had finished, the words sounding absurd in his deep voice. "You're telling me you have superpowers?" "Yes," Izuku said, meeting his gaze. "The power I have, it's meant to save people. It's a power that was given to me, and it's my responsibility to use it for others." Bruce was silent for a long moment, his eyes boring into Izuku. Izuku could almost feel the gears turning in the man's head, weighing every word, searching for inconsistencies, for the telltale signs of a lie. "You speak of responsibility," Bruce said finally, his voice a fraction softer, though no less intense. "Of the burden of a legacy. This power, you say it can be destructive to your own body if you are not careful?" "Yes," Izuku admitted, glancing at his cast. "If I use too much, my body can't handle it. I have to regulate the output carefully." Bruce's expression flickered with something Izuku couldn't quite identify, a spark of understanding, perhaps, or recognition. He shared a look with Alfred, a silent communication passing between them in an instant. "Alfred," Bruce said. "Help him get dressed. Bring him down to the study when he's ready." Without another word, the imposing man turned and swept out of the room, the shadows seeming to welcome him back. Alfred retrieved a set of clothes, a simple gray sweatsuit that was soft and comfortable, and helped Izuku dress, his movements practiced and gentle. "Is he always like that?" Izuku asked, wincing as he pulled the shirt over his bandaged torso. "Mr. Wayne has been under a great deal of strain recently," Alfred replied, his voice laced with a carefully controlled sadness. "Our family has suffered a great loss." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken grief. Izuku didn't press. He understood the language of loss all too well. Alfred led him out of the infirmary, and through the halls of Wayne Manor. It was less a house and more a museum, filled with priceless art, ancient artifacts, and ghosts. Every portrait that lined the grand corridors seemed to watch them pass with somber eyes. Izuku, a boy who grew up in a small apartment, felt utterly out of place, a stray weed in a meticulously cultivated garden. The study was dominated by a large, unlit fireplace and a grandfather clock that stood sentinel in the corner. Bruce Wayne was standing by the clock, his back to them. "Tell me again about being a symbol," Bruce said, not turning around. "Your hero, All Might. You said he was the symbol of peace. He was," Izuku said, his voice filled with reverence. "He was more than just the #1 hero. His presence alone was enough to deter crime. When people saw him, they felt safe. He represented the very best of us. He was hope." Bruce's shoulders seemed to slump, just for a moment. "Hope," he repeated, the words sounding like a foreign language on his tongue. He turned to face Izuku, and the grief on his face was now raw and unguarded. It was the face of a father who had lost a child. "There is something I need to show you," he said. He reached out and turned the hands of the grandfather clock to 10:47. With a low groan of moving gears, the clock swung away from the wall, revealing a dark, gaping passage. A cold, damp breeze, smelling of earth and ozone, drifted out. Izuku stared, his eyes wide. A secret passage. A hidden headquarters. His hero-analyzing mind went into overdrive. "Follow me," Bruce commanded, and descended into the darkness. Izuku hesitated for a moment, then followed, Alfred a steady presence behind him. The passage opened into a high-tech elevator that descended at a dizzying speed into the earth. When the doors hissed open, Izuku's breath caught in his throat. He was standing on a platform overlooking a vast, cavernous space. It was a fusion of raw nature and bleeding-edge technology. A giant supercomputer, its screens displaying dozens of data streams, sat at the center of the main platform. A fleet of strange, armored vehicles sat in alcoves carved from the rock. Glass cases displayed costumes, trophies from past battles. And everywhere there was the sound of dripping water and the fluttering of 1,000 leathery wings. Bats, hundreds of them, clung to the ceiling high above. This is... Izuku was speechless. It was a hero's base. A real one. But his awe was cut short as Bruce led him towards the center of the cave, to a brightly lit medical bay. There, lying on an advanced medical bed, was a young man. He was hooked up to a myriad of machines, his face pale and still, a web of bandages covering his head and torso. Even unconscious, there was a kindness in his features, a ghost of an easy smile on his lips. Beside the bed, a sleek, black and blue uniform was carefully laid out, its chest emblazoned with the stylized symbol of a bird. "This is Dick Grayson," Bruce said, his voice thick with a pain he could no longer conceal. "My son." He gestured to the uniform. "To the world, he is Nightwing. He patrols the city of Bloodhaven. He is its protector. Its hope." Bruce's gaze fell on his son's still form. 2 nights ago, there was a coordinated attack. A trap. Dick saved dozens of lives, but he was caught in the blast. He's in a coma. The doctors don't know when, or if, he will wake up. Izuku stared at the fallen hero, his heart aching with a familiar sorrow. He had seen too many of his own comrades fall, too many bright lights extinguished by the darkness they fought. I'm so sorry," he whispered. Bruce looked from his son to Izuku, and a desperate, almost mad idea began to form in his eyes. "The city can't know he's gone. The criminal element is already testing the waters. If they think Bloodhaven is unprotected, the city will tear itself apart. Hope is a fragile thing, Midoriya. Once it's gone, it's almost impossible to get back." He took a step closer to Izuku, his massive frame looming over him. "I've reviewed the footage of your arrival. The way you moved. Your physique, your height, you are a close match. You speak of the burden of being a symbol. Of the responsibility of power." The insane, impossible implication of his words began to dawn on Izuku. His stomach turned to ice. What are you asking?" "I am asking you to take his place," Bruce said, the words heavy as gravestones. "I am asking you to put on that suit. To become Nightwing until he can return. Bloodhaven needs its hero. It needs its symbol of hope." Izuku recoiled as if struck. "No! I can't! I can't pretend to be him. It wouldn't be right. He's a hero. I'm just a kid from another world." "You are a kid who ran into the path of a speeding car to save a stranger," Bruce countered, his voice intense. "You are a kid who understands sacrifice. I don't need you to be him. I need you to be what he represented." "Contact," a crisp, female voice said from the main computer. A holographic screen flickered to life, showing the face of a young woman with brilliant red hair and an intelligent, no-nonsense expression. "Bruce, my network just flagged a major arms deal going down at the docks tonight. A shipment of military-grade hardware. It's the kind of move the gangs only make when they think no one is watching. Who is on point?" Her eyes then fell on Izuku, and her brow furrowed in confusion. "Who's the kid?" "Oracle, this is Izuku Midoriya," Bruce said. "He will be handling the situation." The woman, Oracle, stared in disbelief. "Excuse me? Bruce, we are not putting an unknown civilian in the field. We have no file, no psych profile, no background check? This is an unjustifiable risk. Yeah, B, what the hell is going on? A new voice, distorted by a helmet modulator, crackled over the comm system. It was rough, laced with a bitter sarcasm. Alfred called me, said you'd lost your damn mind. Didn't think he meant it literally. You're not seriously thinking of replacing Dick with some stray you picked up off the street, are you? Suddenly, a blur of motion dropped from the shadows of the cave ceiling, landing in a perfect, silent crouch. It was a boy, smaller than Izuku but radiating an aura of coiled lethality. He was dressed in a suit of red, black, and yellow, a dark hood pulled over his head and a domino mask obscuring his eyes. A katana was strapped to his back. This was Robin. He rose to his full height and stalked toward Izuku, his eyes, visible through the mask, burning with pure, unadulterated rage. So this is it. Robin spat, his voice a cultured snarl of contempt. This is the replacement. The insult my father has chosen to dishonor my brother's legacy. He stopped directly in front of Izuku, jabbing a gloved finger into his chest. You. I don't know where you came from, and I don't care. You will never be him. You are unworthy to even stand in his shadow. If you dare to put on that uniform, if you so much as tarnish his name, I will personally end you. Izuku was completely overwhelmed. The imposing man asking him to commit what felt like sacrilege, the disembodied voices of unseen allies, the furious boy assassin threatening his life. It was too much. He looked from the grieving father's desperate face, to the furious brother's tear-filled eyes, to the still, peaceful form of the hero in the medical bed. He saw a family shattered by grief. He saw a city on the brink of chaos. And he saw himself, a hero in training, whose entire life, his entire purpose, was to help those in need. He had always been the one to run in when everyone else ran out. He had always been the one whose body moved before he could think. His own words, spoken to All Might so long ago, echoed in his mind. Can I be a hero, even without a quirk? He had been given a power, but was the power what made him a hero, or was it the choice to act, the will to save, the heart that broke for the suffering of others? He took a deep breath, the cold air of the cave filling his lungs, and made his decision. I can't be your son, he said, his voice quiet but firm, directing his words to Bruce. I can't be your brother, he added, looking at the still seething Robin. I don't know anything about being Nightwing. I don't know this city. I don't know your enemies, and I don't know your rules. He paused, his gaze returning to the man in the medical bed. But I know what it's like to see people in trouble and feel powerless to help. I know what it's like to carry the weight of a legacy. If this city needs hope, if your family needs time to heal, then I'll do it. I have to try. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken emotion. Oracle's hologram was frozen in a state of shock. The calm line was dead silent. Damien stared, his fury momentarily replaced by stunned disbelief. Bruce's expression didn't change, but Izuku saw a flicker of something in his eyes, not relief, but a deep, profound sorrow, as if he had just condemned another young soldier to a war. Alfred, Bruce said, his voice a low rumble. The suit. Alfred nodded grimly and led Izuku to one of the glass display cases. With a quiet hiss, the case retracted into the floor, revealing the Nightwing suit on a mannequin. Up close, it was a work of art, a microweave of Nomex and Kevlar, with interlocking plates of lightweight ceramic armor. The lines were sleek, built for speed and acrobatics. It was a suit designed for a man who danced through the darkness, a beacon of light and grace. Slowly, reverently, Izuku began to change. He shed the comfortable sweatsuit and began to don the armor of a stranger, a legacy that was not his own. The material was cold against his skin, the fit almost perfect but fundamentally wrong. It was tailored for a different build, for muscles honed by years of acrobatic grace, not the explosive, compact power of One for All. He pulled the mask over his eyes. It settled into place, obscuring his identity, obscuring Izuku Midoriya. Alfred handed him the final piece, a pair of polished black eskrima sticks. They felt heavy and alien in his hands. His transformation complete, Izuku turned and faced the large, polished black wall of the armory, which reflected his image like a dark mirror. He stared. The figure staring back was not him. The iconic blue bird stretched across the chest of a stranger. The mask hid his freckles, hid the earnest, hopeful light in his green eyes. It was a silhouette of a hero, but the soul inside was that of a lost, scared boy, a million light years from home. The suit wasn't just a costume. It was a burden, a promise, and a cage. It was a suit that was infinitely too big to fill. And tonight, he had to fly in it. The grapple gun felt like a clumsy, primitive toy in Izuku's hand. Compared to the intuitive, almost symbiotic connection he had with Black Whip, this was a crude tool of wire and mechanics. He squeezed the trigger, and with a jarring thwumpus, the hook shot out, embedding itself in the cornice of a Gothic skyscraper hundreds of feet above. The winch engaged, and he was violently yanked off the rooftop, a puppet on a string soaring into the cold, unforgiving Gotham night. His stomach lurched. This wasn't float. There was no grace, no control over his ascent. He was just dead weight being reeled in. He slammed into the side of the building, his armor taking the brunt of the impact, but the collision still sent a rattling shockwave through his already aching bones. Scrabbling for purchase, he managed to find his footing and disengage the line, panting in the frigid air. "Your movements are inefficient." Batman's voice, a disembodied rumble of disapproval, echoed in his ear. "You're wasting energy with every launch. Predict your trajectory. Use the momentum. Do not fight the line. Become an extension of it." "Right. Extension of the line," Izuku muttered, his breath fogging in front of his face. He looked out over the city. Gotham was a sprawling, glittering beast, a labyrinth of light and shadow that stretched to the horizon. It was magnificent and terrifying in equal measure. Every dark alley seemed to hold a threat. Every gargoyle seemed to watch him with stony contempt. This was their city. He was an interloper, a fraud in a stolen skin. "Oracle, report," Batman commanded. "Quiet night so far." Barbara's voice was crisp and professional, but Izuku could detect an undercurrent of skepticism. He was a variable she couldn't account for, a data point without a history. "Scanners are showing baseline activity. A few BS in the Diamond District, a carjacking in the Narrows. Nothing that requires specialized attention." The pause was deliberate. "He needs a field test," Bruce stated, devoid of emotion. "The first sign of trouble, he goes in. I want to see what he can do." "He's not talking to me," Izuku realized. "He's talking about me. Like I'm a piece of equipment." The thought sent a chill down his spine that had nothing to do with the wind whipping around him. "TT. More likely what he cannot do." Damien's voice dripped with venom over the calm. "I am monitoring from the east side. I will be ready to intervene when this pretender inevitably fails." Izuku closed his eyes for a second, trying to center himself. He wasn't Deku right now. He was Nightwing. What would Nightwing do? He'd probably make a joke, spin on his heel, and dive off the building into a perfect, swan-like arc. Izuku, on the other hand, felt like he was about to throw up. The eskrima sticks attached to his back felt heavy and useless. He'd spent a few hours in the Batcave's training room with them, and the results had been embarrassing. He had more grace tripping over his own feet than he did wielding those weapons. "Got something?" Oracle's voice cut through his thoughts, sharp and focused. "Silent alarm tripped at a convenience store on the corner of Sprang and 11th. Crime alley adjacent. 2 armed assailants, confirmed hostages. Looks like a botched robbery. GCPD is 10 minutes out." "Nightwing!" Batman's voice was a flat, cold command. "Engage." This was it. Izuku's heart hammered against his ribs. He took a deep breath, aimed the grapple gun, and this time, he tried to listen to Bruce's advice. He launched himself into the abyss, and instead of fighting the pull, he let it swing him in a wide arc, using the momentum to carry him over the street. He landed, clumsy but upright, on the next rooftop, and then the next, a frantic, ungraceful shadow moving across the city. It wasn't flying. It wasn't even falling with style. It was a controlled plummet. He reached the designated building in under a minute, his lungs burning. He crouched behind the rooftop ledge, peering down at the store below. It was a grimy, 24/7 convenience mart, its fluorescent lights casting a sickly yellow glow onto the rain-slicked street. Through the large front window, he could see the scene clearly. His mind, the one tool that felt truly his own in this strange new world, kicked into high gear. Okay. Analysis time. 2 perpetrators, both male. Assailant 1 is tall, thin, pacing nervously by the door. He's holding a small caliber pistol, but his grip is unsteady. He keeps wiping his sweaty palms on his jeans. He's the lookout. He's scared. Assailant 2 is behind the counter, holding a sawed-off shotgun on the elderly store clerk. He's bigger, trying to project an aura of control, but his voice, even muffled through the glass, is pitched too high. He's scared, too. Just hiding it better. 3 hostages. The clerk, an old man who looks resigned, like he's seen this a dozen times. A young woman cowering behind a rack of potato chips, sobbing quietly. And a teenage boy trying to look brave near the frozen foods, but his wide, terrified eyes give him away. Entry point's front door is a no-go. Side windows are barred. Back door in the alley is a possibility, but likely locked. Rooftop access? Oracle, he whispered, his voice barely a breath. Is there a skylight or roof access hatch on this building? There was a pause, filled with the sound of rapid typing. Negative, Barbara replied, a hint of surprise in her tone. The building is old. No roof access. But there is a ventilation shaft on the western wall. It's small, but according to the city blueprints, it leads directly to the back storeroom. Thank you, Batman's voice cut in. Standard procedure is a shock and awe entry through the front window. Neutralize the gunmen before they can react. Prioritize the one with the shotgun. Understood, Izuku said, but a different plan was already forming in his mind. A plan born not of intimidation, but of observation. These weren't supervillains. They were desperate men who had made a terrible choice. A shock and awe approach could get someone killed if one of them panicked and pulled the trigger. He ignored the cold advice and slipped over the side of the building, his fingers finding purchase on the old brickwork. He moved silently, his enhanced physiology making him preternaturally quiet. He found the vent cover. It was rusted shut. He could have ripped it off with a flicker of one for all, but that was too loud, too risky. Instead, he pulled one of the eskrima sticks from his back. He fumbled with it for a moment, the smooth metal feeling alien in his hand, before wedging the tip into the seam and using it as a lever. With a low, painful groan of tortured metal, the cover popped open. He squeezed himself into the shaft. It was a tight fit, the cold, dusty metal scraping against his armor. He moved inch by inch, his ears straining, listening to the muffled sounds from the store. Just give us the cash and we're gone, old man. It was the shotgun wielder, his voice cracking with a mix of aggression and fear. I already gave you everything in the register, the clerk's tired voice replied. It's less than $100. Liar! There's a safe in the back. Izuku reached the end of the shaft, another grated cover separating him from the storeroom. He peered through. It was dark, cluttered with boxes of inventory. He gently pushed the cover. It was loose. He slipped out of the vent and into the storeroom as silently as a falling leaf. He took another deep breath, trying to calm the frantic drumming in his chest. He wasn't a bat. He wasn't a creature of the night who thrived on fear. He was a hero who saved people, and that's what he was going to do. He opened the storeroom door a crack. He could see the back of the man with the shotgun. The other assailant was still by the door, his attention on the street. Izuku formulated a plan. 3 seconds. That's all I'll need. He pushed the door open and stepped out. The first gunman, the one by the door, saw him first. His eyes went wide with a mixture of terror and disbelief. What the? Before he could raise his pistol, Izuku was moving. He didn't use a flashy burst of power, just the pure, explosive potential of his own highly trained muscles. A 0% dash that was still faster than any normal human. He crossed the room in a heartbeat. He didn't throw a punch. Instead, he slapped the man's gun hand upward, sending the pistol flying, while his other hand came up and cupped the back of his head, guiding him into the wall with a solid, but non-lethal, thud. The man crumpled unconscious. One down. The second gunman whirled around, his eyes wild with panic, swinging the shotgun towards Izuku. The hostages screamed. Izuku had already anticipated this. He didn't try to fight the man's momentum. He dropped low, the shotgun blast roaring over his head, shattering a display of cheap liquor behind him. As he came up, he grabbed one of the eskrima sticks. He tried for a fancy, disarming twirl he'd seen Dick Grayson perform on a training video. The stick slipped from his grasp, clattering uselessly to the linoleum floor. Idiot! His mind screamed. There was no time for finesse. The gunman was trying to pump another shell into the chamber. Izuku lunged forward, closing the distance. He slammed his shoulder into the man's chest, driving him back against the counter. He grabbed the barrel of the shotgun with his left hand, ignoring the searing heat, and with his right, he delivered a single, precise chop to the man's wrist. There was a sickening crack of bone, and the man screamed, his grip on the weapon failing. Izuku ripped the shotgun away and tossed it aside. The fight was over. The man cradled his broken wrist, sobbing in a mixture of pain and terror. The whole encounter had lasted less than 5 seconds. The calm in his ear was silent for a beat, a stunned, static-filled void. Target neutralized, Izuku reported, his voice surprisingly steady. He turned to the hostages. It's okay now. You're all safe. He offered a hand to the young woman on the floor, his face softening into the reassuring expression he'd practiced 1,000 times in the mirror, the one that emulated All Might. Holy crap! The teenage boy breathed, staring at him. You're Nightwing. Izuku's smile felt brittle, fake. Just helping out, he said. He could feel the eyes of his unseen audience on him, judging every move. He had succeeded, but he had done it his way. He hadn't used their methods. He had fumbled, he had improvised, and worst of all, he had shown compassion. In the rigid black and white world of the Bat, he had just painted in a messy, unwelcome shade of gray. Report! Batman's voice commanded, colder than ever. Threats neutralized. Hostages are secure, Izuku said, walking over to the whimpering gunman and beginning to zip-tie his hands with a restraint from his belt. The man looked up at him, tears streaming down his face. My kid, he's sick. The bills. I didn't know what else to do. Izuku paused, his hands hovering over the zip-tie. He looked into the man's desperate eyes and saw not a monster, but a father who had reached the end of his rope. This wasn't the way, Izuku said softly, his voice full of a sorrow that confused the man. There's always another way. He secured the ties and stood up, the weight of the city, of this broken, hopeless place, settling on his shoulders. What are you doing? Damien's voice was a hiss of pure disgust in his ear. You are fraternizing with the enemy. Subdue him and move on. Your sentimentality is a liability. He's subdued, Izuku replied, turning his back on the scene and walking out of the store into the cleansing rain, the wail of approaching sirens growing louder. He had won, so why did it feel like he had failed the critical test? He stood on the roof of the Gotham Merchants Bank, the stone gargoyle beside him weeping black, greasy rainwater. The adrenaline from the fight had faded, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion and a profound sense of alienation. He had just saved 3 people, but he felt no satisfaction. He had only earned the silent condemnation of the man who put him in this suit, and the open contempt of his new brother. He felt a flicker at the base of his skull. A familiar, prickling sensation. Danger sense. It wasn't a scream, just a low hum. A warning. He wasn't in immediate peril, but something was wrong. Something was close. He spun around just in time to see a small shadow detach itself from the larger shadow of a rooftop chimney. The figure moved with a liquid silence that was utterly inhuman. It was Robin, and in his hand, glinting in the faint moonlight, was the unmistakable shape of a katana. I watched your performance, Damien said, his voice dangerously calm as he stalked forward, the rain plastering his dark hair to his forehead. It was pathetic. The hostages are safe. The criminals were apprehended. That's a win, Izuku countered, shifting into a defensive stance. He unclipped his eskrima sticks, holding them in a clumsy, uncertain grip. You hesitated, Damien accused, his eyes narrowing. You spoke to that filth. You showed him pity. That pity is a disease. It is the weakness that allowed the scum of this city to put my brother in that bed. Grayson was always too soft, and you are a mockery of even his flawed ideology. The sword came up, its tip aimed directly at Izuku's heart. My father is blinded by his grief. He is desperate enough to trust a stranger with our city's hope. I am not so foolish. I will give you one chance. Take off that uniform, leave this city, and never return. I can't do that, Izuku said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. I gave your father my word. A cruel smile twisted Damien's lips. Then I will remove the uniform from your corpse. Consider this a field test. My field test. Damien didn't charge. He simply exploded into motion. One moment he was 10 feet away, the next he was on top of Izuku, his blade a silver arc aimed at Izuku's neck. Izuku reacted on pure instinct. He dropped, the sword hissing through the air where his head had just been. He tried to bring an eskrima stick up to block, but Damien was already flowing into his next attack, a low sweep of the blade aimed at Izuku's legs. Izuku leaped back, his agility saving him, but he felt a sharp sting as the tip of the katana sliced through the armor on his calf. This wasn't a spar. The cuts were shallow, but the intent was lethal. Fight me, imposter! Damien snarled, pressing his attack. He was a whirlwind of deadly precision. Every slash, every thrust, was perfect, economical, and aimed at a vital point. Izuku was forced into a frantic, desperate defense. He was faster and stronger, he knew that, but Damien was infinitely more skilled. He was a master swordsman, a prodigy of the killing arts. Izuku was a brawler who was trying to use knitting needles to defend himself. He parried a thrust with his stick, the impact jarring his entire arm. Damien used the contact to pivot, spinning and lashing out with a vicious kick that caught Izuku in the ribs. The pain was blinding, and Izuku staggered back, gasping for air. You are slow, Damien taunted, advancing. Clumsy. Unworthy. Izuku knew he couldn't win this way. He couldn't fight Damien on his terms. More importantly, he wouldn't. He was not going to hurt a grieving, angry child, no matter how deadly that child was, so he changed the rules of the fight. He stopped trying to block. He started to evade. Damien lunged, aiming for a killing blow. Izuku felt the familiar crackle of energy in his veins. He didn't want to use it, not against a normal human, but he had no choice. One for all 3%. It wasn't a blast. It was a whisper of power, channeled entirely into his legs. To Damien, it was as if Izuku had simply ceased to exist in the spot where he had been standing. The sword plunged through empty air, and Damien stumbled, his momentum carrying him forward. Izuku was now behind him, his heart pounding. Damien whirled around, his face a mask of shock and fury. What was that? You should stop, Izuku pleaded, raising his hands. I don't want to hurt you. You think you are capable of hurting me? Damien laughed, a cold, sharp sound. He threw something. 3 bat-shaped shurikens spun through the air, aimed at Izuku's unarmored face. Again Izuku moved. He activated that tiny sliver of power, and the world seemed to slow down. He saw the rotation of each batarang, the path they would take. He didn't dodge. He simply plucked them out of the air, one by one, his fingers moving with impossible speed. He held them in his open palm. Damien's jaw dropped. That was not humanly possible. How? He demanded, his voice shaking with a rage that was now tinged with disbelief. He charged again, his movements more frantic, less precise. He was angry, and his anger was making him sloppy. This was Izuku's chance. Not to strike, but to end it. As Damien's sword came down in a powerful overhead slash, Izuku dropped one of his eskrima sticks. He met the blade not with his remaining stick, but with the palm of his armored glove. The impact was immense, but the armor held. With his other hand, moving with another 3% burst of speed, he snaked his fingers around Damien's wrist, twisting sharply. It was a move he'd seen Eraserhead use 100 times. A simple, effective disabling technique. Damien cried out in pain and surprise, his fingers spasming, and the katana fell, clattering onto the wet rooftop. Before Damien could recover, Izuku was already moving on the next weapon. He saw the glint of a knife being drawn from Damien's belt. He didn't wait. A single, thin strand of black energy, no thicker than a thread, shot from his fingertip. It wasn't the powerful, destructive black whip he used in battle. It was a surgeon's tool. The tendril wrapped around the hilt of the knife and yanked, pulling it from Damien's grasp and sending it skittering across the roof. Izuku then closed the distance, his hands a blur. He systematically and gently disarmed Damien of every hidden weapon. A batarang from his boot, another from his gauntlet, a garrote wire from a hidden pocket. He never landed a punch, never delivered a kick. He just took away the boy's ability to do harm, piece by piece. Finally Damien stood before him, weaponless, panting, his small chest heaving. He was trembling, not from cold, but from sheer, impotent fury. He had been utterly, comprehensively defeated without his opponent ever throwing a single offensive strike. It was the ultimate humiliation. "Why won't you fight me?" he screamed, his voice cracking, the sound of a heartbroken child finally breaking through the shell of the trained assassin. "Stop this! Stop dodging and fight me like a man!" He lunged forward, his hands balled into fists, aiming a wild, tear-fueled punch at Izuku's face. Izuku didn't dodge this time. He stood his ground and caught the small fist in his much larger hand. He held it there gently, his grip firm but not crushing. He looked down at the furious, grief-stricken boy, and for the first time, he didn't see Robin, the deadly assassin. He saw a little brother who missed his older brother. He saw a son who felt abandoned by his father. He saw a kid drowning in pain, lashing out at the only available target. "Because I'm not your enemy, Damien," Izuku said, his voice soft, the rain running down his mask like tears. He let go of Damien's fist. He stood tall, a strange and lonely figure in a suit that wasn't his, on a rooftop in a world he didn't belong to. He looked at the boy who hated him with all his heart, and he offered him not a challenge, but an explanation. A truth. "I'm not trying to replace your brother," he said, his voice clear and resonant in the night air, carrying over the sound of the rain. "I could never do that. No one could." Damien stared at him, his anger faltering in the face of such unexpected sincerity. "I'm doing this because your father asked me to," Izuku continued, his gaze unwavering. "And because this city, his city, needs to believe he's still out here watching over them. I'm not trying to take his place. I'm trying to make sure there's a city for him to come back to." The words struck Damien harder than any physical blow could have. They bypassed the warrior, the assassin, the heir to the bat, and found the small, hurting boy underneath. They reframed everything. This imposter's actions, the sentimentality with the criminals, the refusal to fight him, it wasn't weakness. It was something else. Something he didn't have a name for. Damien's face crumpled. The fury was replaced by a deep, wrenching confusion and a sorrow so profound it buckled his knees. He wouldn't cry. He was the son of the Batman, the grandson of the demon's head. He did not cry. But a single, choked sob escaped his lips. He straightened up, his pride a shield he hastily reassembled. He glared at Izuku, his eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "You know nothing," he spat, but the venom was gone, replaced by a hollow echo. He turned and fired his grapple gun into the darkness, disappearing over the edge of the roof without another word, leaving Izuku alone with the discarded weapons and the sound of the rain. Izuku stood there for a long time, the cold seeping into his bones. He had survived his trial by fire, and his judgment by the bat's sun. He had won, but it was a victory that tasted of ash and grief. A quiet click sounded in his ear. It was Alfred. "A difficult night, Master Izuku." The butler's voice was warm, a stark contrast to the coldness he'd heard all evening. "But a necessary one. I believe tea and a hot meal are in order. Come home, come home." The words were simple, but for a lost boy a universe away from everything he had ever known, they were a lifeline. He looked out at the dark, sprawling city, and for the first time, it felt just a little less terrifying. The night was far from over, but for now, he had survived. The Gotham clock tower was a sanctuary of controlled chaos. From the outside, it was a stoic, Gothic sentinel, its hands frozen at 10:47, a silent monument to a forgotten time. Inside, it was the digital nerve center of a silent war, a nest of light and information woven into the ancient stone. Wires, thick as snakes, snaked across the floor, connecting humming servers and banks of monitors that bathed the circular room in a perpetual, cool blue twilight. In the center of this technological web, like a spider sensing every tremor, sat Barbara Gordon. Her world was a mosaic of data streams. One screen displayed the city's power grid, another the GCPD dispatch channels, a third the encrypted communications of the Falcone crime family. She was Oracle, and from her wheelchair, she saw more of Gotham than anyone who walked its streets. She saw its arteries of traffic, heard its whispered conspiracies, felt its arrhythmic pulse of crime and fear. She processed, she analyzed, she predicted. Information was her weapon, and logic was her shield. And right now, her logic was failing her. Her attention was fixed on the main central monitor, which was currently split into 4 feeds. 3 were live surveillance from drones shadowing the new Nightwing. The 4th was a window filled with lines of code, running a comparative analysis. On one side was a data profile of Dick Grayson's movements, fluid, acrobatic, efficient, a kinetic poetry she knew as well as her own heartbeat. On the other side was a profile of the imposter, Izuku Midoriya, explosive, erratic, and punctuated by moments of impossible, physics-defying speed that her software kept flagging as corrupted data. For 3 nights she had watched him. And for 3 nights, he had been a walking, talking anomaly. Her initial assessment had been harsh, clinical. He was a reckless, untrained variable introduced into a volatile equation. Bruce was operating from a place of grief, not strategy. The boy was a liability, but the data was telling a different story. Her fingers flew across her custom keyboard, the soft clicks echoing in the cavernous space. She pulled up his patrol reports. Dick's reports were concise, focused on threat neutralization and asset denial. Midoriya's were verbose. He didn't just report a mugging, he included observations on the socioeconomic indicators of the neighborhood, the lack of street lighting, the slow police response times, and a detailed, almost obsessive analysis of the mugger's quirk, his modus operandi and psychological state. He wrote them like a student completing an impossibly detailed homework assignment. He wasn't just fighting crime. He was studying it, dissecting it, trying to understand it from the root. Oracle. His voice came over the calm, quiet and respectful. He never called her Babs, like Dick did. He was always formal. I'm on the roof of the old Monarch Theater. I've spotted what looks like a drug deal going down in the alley below. 5 individuals. Looks like venom distribution. Acknowledged, Nightwing, she replied, her voice neutral as she instantly pulled up the theater's security cameras. The grainy footage confirmed his report. Standard engagement protocol. Disrupt and disarm. GCPD ETA is 6 minutes. Oracle, one of them is just a kid, he said, his voice troubled. He can't be more than 15. He looks terrified. He's the lookout, Barbara sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. This again. Criminals are not defined by their age, Nightwing. He made a choice. He's a threat. Treat him as such. He's not a threat, he's a victim, Izuku countered, his tone earnest. This area, your data showed a 40% high school dropout rate and the highest youth unemployment in the city. These gangs don't recruit, they conscript. Taking him down won't solve the problem. Our mission is not to solve the city's sociological problems on a street corner, Nightwing. It is to enforce the law and protect the innocent. Engage. Her tone was firm, a clear order. There was a pause. Understood, he said, but his voice was heavy with a reluctance she found both infuriating and intriguing. She watched on the drone feed as he dropped into the alley. But he didn't attack. He landed silently behind a dumpster, out of sight. He waited. He observed. When the deal was complete, and money had changed hands, the 4 older members clapped the kid on the shoulder and walked away, leaving him alone with his cut of the cash. Now, she thought. Now he'll move in. But he didn't. He waited until the kid was alone, counting the crumpled bills under a flickering streetlight. The boy's face was a mixture of fear and a grim sort of pride. Then, the shadow of Nightwing fell over him. The boy yelped, dropping the money and stumbling backward, his hand flying to a knife at his belt. It's not worth it, Izuku said, his voice calm, not threatening. He wasn't using the gravelly, intimidating bad voice. He was just talking to him. That money, it feels like a solution right now, doesn't it? Like it's the only way out. The kid, frozen in terror, just nodded, his eyes wide. It's not, Izuku continued, taking a slow step forward, his hands held open in a non-threatening gesture. It's a cage. And every time you take their money, the bars get a little bit stronger. I can't let you keep it. But I can give you a choice. Barbara leaned closer to her monitor, fascinated despite herself. This was not in any of their operational playbooks. You can pull that knife, and I'll have to stop you, Izuku said. Or you can walk away. Go home. And tomorrow, you can go to the Martha Wayne Foundation Youth Center on 5th and Main. Ask for Dr. Tompkins. Tell her, a friend sent you. Tell her you're looking for a better way out. He reached into a pouch on his belt and pulled out a small, folded card, placing it on a nearby crate. The choice is yours. He then turned and, with a burst of silent speed, melted back into the shadows, leaving the stunned teenager alone with the money, the card, and an impossible choice. Barbara watched, holding her breath, as the boy stood trembling for a long minute. He looked at the money on the ground, then at the card. He looked down the alley where his new employers had disappeared, then back at the empty rooftops. With a shuddering sigh, he scooped up the crumpled bills, shoved them into a storm drain, and snatched the card from the crate. Then he ran, not deeper into Crime Alley, but back towards the main street, towards home. A single, silent tear traced a path down his cheek. Barbara sat back, stunned. The other 4 dealers were picked up by GCPD 3 blocks away, disoriented and webbed to a lamppost with a strange, black, fibrous substance that wasn't in Nightwing's standard arsenal. The mission was a success, but the methodology was unheard of. He hadn't just stopped a crime. He had, potentially, saved a life. She ran a deep-level diagnostic on his comm frequency, isolating the audio from his fight with Damien 2 nights prior. She had heard the exchange, but she replayed it now, listening to his final words. I'm trying to make sure there's a city for him to come back to. He wasn't trying to be Nightwing. He was trying to be a hero, in the purest, most idealistic sense of the word. He was trying to fix the broken things. In a city built on cynicism and fear, his earnest, almost naive optimism should have gotten him killed. Instead, it seemed to be working. Her thoughts were interrupted by a priority alert flashing across her screen, overriding all other windows. It was a direct, encrypted message sent on a channel that had been silent for years. The icon was a single, green question mark. A riddle? Bruce's voice was a low growl from the Batcave, piped into Barbara's comms. Nigma hasn't been active in 3 years, not since his last stay in Arkham. He's supposedly reformed. Well, his idea of reformation seems to involve high-stakes death traps, Barbara retorted, her fingers flying as she traced the message's origin. The message was bounced through a dozen proxy servers, but the source code has his signature all over it. Arrogant, needlessly complex, and showy. It's him. The riddle had appeared on every screen in the city: Times Square, Gotham Bank, the Jumbotrons at the sports stadium. I have cities, but no houses. I have mountains, but no trees. I have water, but no fish. What am I? A map, Izuku said instantly from his perch atop the GCPD headquarters. Barbara paused. Correct. It's one of his classic warm-ups. Too easy. It's a distraction, Bruce said. He's testing the waters. Oracle, locate him. Already on it, she replied. While you were monologuing, I cross-referenced the encryption algorithm with city infrastructure schematics. He's piggybacking off the emergency broadcast system, which means he's tapped into one of 3 major network hubs. Hubs located at. She brought up a city map, 3 locations flashing red. The Gotham Stock Exchange, the soda-cola bottling plant, and the old Gotham Gazette printing press. He's baiting me, Bruce growled. He wants me to choose, to split my focus. I'll take the printing press, Izuku volunteered. It's the furthest from the city center. Less potential for collateral damage if it's a trap. Negative, Bruce said immediately. You are not ready for Riddler. He's a psychological combatant. He'll get inside your head. I'll take the stock exchange. Robin, you take the plant, TT. As you command, father, came Damien's clipped reply. What about the printing press? Izuku asked. We can't just leave it. It's the least likely target, Bruce stated, a note of finality in his voice. A misdirection. Stay on your patrol route. Do not engage. The calm line went silent. Izuku stood on the rooftop, looking at the blinking red light on his own holographic map, a knot of unease tightening in his stomach. Bruce was thinking like a general, prioritizing high-value targets. But Izuku, the lifelong student of heroes and villains, knew that egos like the Riddler's didn't work that way. A printing press, a place of words, of knowledge, of information. It wasn't about monetary value, it was about symbolism. He felt a familiar prickle at the base of his skull. Faint, but insistent. Danger sense. Something was wrong with Bruce's logic. He made a decision. Oracle, he said, his voice low. I'm disobeying a direct order. He didn't wait for a reply. He fired his grapple line and swung off into the night, heading for the abandoned printing press on the industrial outskirts of the city. In the clock tower, Barbara watched his icon deviate from its assigned path. She should have reported him. She should have shut off his comms. It was protocol. Instead, she found herself routing satellite imagery of the printing press to his HUD and highlighting potential entry points. Be careful, kid, she whispered to the empty room. The Gotham Gazette printing press was a corpse of industry. A massive, brick and iron mausoleum where the city's stories had once been born. Now, it was silent, draped in shadows and cobwebs, smelling of dust and decay. Izuku slipped through a broken window on the third floor, his landing making barely a sound on the grimy floor. The main pressroom below was a cavernous space, dominated by the hulking, silent forms of the printing presses, behemoths of steel that looked like sleeping iron dragons. The only light came from a single, green-tinged spotlight aimed at the center of the room. In the middle of the light sat a simple wooden chair. In the chair was a man, bound and gagged, a frantic terror in his eyes. A complex device was strapped to his chest, a tangle of wires connected to a pressure plate on the floor beneath his feet. A digital timer on the device was counting down from 10 minutes. Above him, projected onto the far wall in glowing green letters, was a new riddle. I have a neck, but no head. I have a body, but no legs. I am often used to carry your burdens. What am I? A bottle, Izuku murmured, his analytical mind kicking in. Soda cola plant. It's a confirmation. The real bomb is at the plant. Damien is walking into a trap. This whole setup was just a sideshow, designed to broadcast the main event. A camera was mounted on a nearby pillar, its red light blinking. Riddler wanted a live audience for whatever he had planned for Robin. Oracle, do you read me? He whispered into his comm. The press is a trap, but it confirms the real target is the soda cola plant. You have to warn Robin. Static. He tried again. Nothing. The air in the building was thick with signal jamming frequencies. He was cut off. Alone. He looked at the man in the chair, then at the timer. 7:43. The pressure plate meant he couldn't just lift the man off the chair. The bomb was likely rigged to explode if his weight was removed. A classic Riddler setup. He had to disarm the bomb. He dropped down to the main floor, his boots making no sound. He approached the chair cautiously, his eyes scanning every inch of the device. It was a mess of wires, red, blue, green, yellow, a deliberate attempt to confuse. Classic misdirection. Don't worry, he said to the terrified man, his voice a low, calming reassurance. I'm going to get you out of here. He knelt, his fingers hovering over the wires. He wasn't a bomb expert like Dick or Tim Drake. But he was a master analyst. He didn't see a bomb, he saw a puzzle, a system with rules. Riddler is arrogant, he thought. The answer is always in the riddle itself. He looked at the projected riddle on the wall again. A bottle. He looked back at the wires. Red, blue, green, yellow. The colors of the soda cola logo. It was a taunt. But which one was the trigger? Which one was the kill switch? He closed his eyes, forcing himself to think outside the box. This isn't about logic. It's about philosophy. It's about Riddler's ego. What was the point of a riddle if the answer wasn't clever? If it wasn't, in its own twisted way, elegant? I have a neck, but no head, a body, but no legs. The riddle was about the bottle. The bomb was at the bottling plant. The colors were the company logo. Riddler wasn't just giving a location, he was giving the entire solution. He was showing off. What's the most famous soda cola slogan? Izuku's mind raced through the pop culture trivia he had absorbed from the Batcomputer's files. He remembered an old, vintage ad. Soda cola as pure as gold, gold. Yellow. It was a leap of faith, a guess based on the psychology of a man he'd never met. But it felt right. He took a deep breath. 3:12 on the timer. He reached out and with a steady hand, he cut the yellow wire. For a heart-stopping second, nothing happened. The timer continued to tick. I was wrong, he thought, a cold dread flooding him. Then, at exactly 300, the timer froze. A green light on the device blinked twice, and with a soft click, the harnesses strapping the man to the chair sprang open. The bomb was disarmed. The hostage, a city councilman who had been reported missing, gasped for air as Izuku removed his gag. Thank you, oh God, thank you, Nightwing! Izuku helped him to his feet. We need to get out of here. And I need to find a way to warn my friends, but how? The comms were jammed. He was miles away from the bottling plant. Even with a taste of One for All, he'd never make it in time. As he pondered this, a shadow moved in the periphery of his vision. It was high up, in the rafters near the ceiling. It was impossibly fast, impossibly silent. It wasn't Robin. It wasn't Batman. It was a ghost. A small figure, clad in a dark, featureless costume, dropped from the rafters, landing in a perfect, silent crouch not 10 feet from him. The only recognizable feature was the mask, a simple black covering with stark white, lens-less eyes. It was a girl, he realized. A teenager, and she was radiating an aura of stillness that was more intimidating than Damien's overt rage. Orphan. Cassandra Cain. She hadn't spoken a word over the comms since he'd arrived. He had almost forgotten she was even on patrol. She tilted her head, observing him, her body a study in relaxed potential. She was like a panther, capable of explosive violence at any second, yet utterly at peace. She took a step forward, then another. She wasn't looking at him, but through him, at the way he held himself, the rhythm of his breathing, the tension in his muscles. Her gaze was as analytical as Barbara's, but her language was not data, it was movement. Kinesics. Body language. She pointed a single, gloved finger at his chest, right over his heart. Then she made a small, soft, thumping motion with her fist. Ba-dump. Ba-dump. His heartbeat. It was fast, but steady. Not panicked. Then she pointed to his head, and then made a gesture as if she were untangling a knot. He understood, somehow. She was reading him. She was saying that his heart was steady, but his mind was a tangled mess. She could see his frustration, his desperation to warn the others. She then held up her hand and made a quick series of intricate, precise movements. It was a language he didn't know, but the meaning was crystal clear. It was a question. Show me. She was asking him how he had solved the riddle. He looked at her, then back at the disarmed bomb. How could he explain his intuitive leap? He pointed to the riddle on the wall. Then to the soda-cola colors on the bomb's wiring. Then he made a gesture for gold or yellow, pointing to a small, brass fitting on one of the old presses. He tried to convey the idea of the slogan, the connection he had made. Cassandra watched his clumsy gestures, her head tilted. Then, a small, almost imperceptible nod. She understood. She didn't just understand his logic, she understood his way of thinking, the intuitive, empathetic leap that went beyond pure data. She then turned her attention to his problem. Comms were down. Time was running out. She looked at him, then looked up at the high, vaulted ceiling. She pointed at him, then made a quick, upward motion with her hand. Go up. Then she pointed to herself and drew a line across the floor towards the hostage. I will take care of him. It was a plan, communicated in less than 5 seconds, without a single word. She was trusting him. Trusting his strange abilities. Izuku nodded, a surge of gratitude washing over him. He wasn't alone. He took a deep breath, focusing inward, drawing on that small, warm ember of One for All. One for All full cowling 5%. Green lightning, faint but unmistakable, crackled across his suit. The air around him grew heavy, charged with energy. Cassandra's blank eyes widened almost imperceptibly. She was seeing it for the first time, the contained power. The impossible strength he held in reserve. Izuku crouched, and then leaped. He didn't just jump, he exploded upwards. He shot past the catwalks, past the second and third floors, his ascent a controlled, vertical rocket launch. He smashed through the grimy skylight at the apex of his jump, showering the roof with shattered glass, and landed gracefully on the rain-slicked tiles. He was above the jammer's main field. He ripped the cowl's comm unit from his ear. It had its own power source. It might just work. Oracle! Robin! Come in now! He yelled into the device. The reply was immediate, frantic. Wing! Where have you been? Comms were down. Robin is inside the plant. The place is rigged to blow. He's facing a dozen armed hostiles and a primary explosive device. It was Barbara. I know. Oracle, patch me through to him. Now, Robin, do you read me? Barbara's voice was tense. I'm a little busy at the moment, Oracle. Damien's voice was strained, punctuated by the sound of gunfire and the clash of metal on metal. Robin, it's Nightwing! Izuku shouted. The bomb! It's a psychological trigger, not a timer. Riddler is watching. He wants you to get angry. There was a grunt of exertion from Damien's end. What are you babbling about, pretender? The riddle is the key. Izuku insisted, his mind racing to put the pieces together from the new perspective. He's using your father's training against you. He knows you'll focus on the hostiles, that you'll fight with aggression. He's baiting your anger. The trigger isn't on a timer, it's tied to your biometrics. Your heart rate. Your adrenaline levels. The more you fight, the faster the countdown goes. A stunned silence came from Damien's end, broken only by his heavy breathing. Calm down, Robin. Izuku's voice was steady, insistent. Stop fighting. You have to lower your heart rate. Breathe. You can't win this fight with your fists. You have to win it with your mind. On the other end of the line, in the heart of a chaotic bottling plant, surrounded by Riddler's goons, Robin froze. He looked at the massive bomb strapped to the main mixing vat, and for the first time, he saw the small biometric sensor wired into the detonator. He looked at the countdown, which was speeding up with every pulse of his enraged heart. The pretender was right. Back on the roof, Izuku fell to his knees, the burst of power leaving him drained. He looked up at the cold, Gotham moon. He had solved the riddle. He had saved a life. He had warned his ally, and through it all, he had finally found a connection. One with the pragmatic, logical oracle who had bent the rules for him, and another, a silent, profound understanding, with the ghost in the machine, the quiet girl who saw not the suit, but the hero inside. He was still an outsider. But tonight, for the first time, he felt like he might just have a place in the strange, dark family of the Bat. Crime Alley wasn't just a place, it was a wound. A festering, unhealed gash in the heart of Gotham that refused to close. Other parts of the city had towering skyscrapers and Gothic spires that clawed at the perpetually overcast sky. Crime Alley had crumbling tenements that seemed to sag under the weight of their own misery. The air here was different, thick with the ghosts of old tragedies and the stench of new desperation. It smelled of cheap liquor, damp brick, and the metallic tang of shed blood. This was Jason Todd's kingdom. And he did not suffer fools in his kingdom. From his perch on a rusted fire escape, the Red Hood watched the new Nightwing drop onto the opposite rooftop. The kid moved with a strange, explosive grace that was all wrong. Dick was a trapeze artist, a flowing river of motion. This kid was a bolt of lightning, all contained energy, and jarring bursts of speed. He was a square peg being hammered into a round hole, and the friction was obvious even from 100 yards away. Jason raised the integrated binoculars in his helmet, zooming in. The kid, Midoriya, was standing at the edge of the roof, looking down at the street below. He looked small in the suit. Lost. Jason let out a humorless chuckle that crackled through his helmet's modulator. Look at him, Roy, Jason muttered, tapping the comm link to his own private channel. Little orphan Izuku, playing dress-up in Big Brother's clothes. It's almost sad, almost? Roy Harper's voice, easygoing and laced with amusement, came back from Star City. Sounds to me like you're going soft, Jay. I thought you'd have put him in traction by now for the sheer audacity. Nah. The demon brat already tried that, Jason said, leaning back against the cold brick. Kid apparently danced around him without throwing a punch. Humiliated him. Gotta admit, that earned him a sliver of my respect. A very, very small sliver. So what's he doing on your turf? Following a lead on our new puppet master, the architect, Jason said, his tone hardening. The name left a bitter taste in his mouth. This new player was different. He wasn't a freak in makeup or a mob boss with delusions of grandeur. He was methodical, precise, and he had orchestrated the attack that put Dick in a coma. That made it personal. Babs traced the shell corporation the architect was using to buy untraceable hardware. The address leads to a derelict theater right in the heart of my territory. The kid is following the breadcrumbs, and you're just going to let him? Hell no, Jason scoffed. I'm going to go say hello. Teach him the rules. He cut the calm link, the silence of Crime Alley rushing back in. The rules. Here, they were simple. Rule number 1, don't get killed. Rule number 2, make sure the other guy gets killed first. From what he'd seen, this Midoriya kid was going to fail spectacularly at both. He watched as Izuku fired his grapple and swung down into the alley behind the Monarch Theater, the very same alley where Bruce Wayne's life had been irrevocably shattered. The symbolism was so thick you could choke on it. Jason pushed himself off the fire escape, his movements silent and predatory. It was time for class to be in session. Izuku landed softly in the alley, the damp ground muffling the sound of his boots. He felt danger sense humming at a low frequency, a constant, ambient warning that was simply the baseline for this part of the city. The air was heavy, and the shadows seemed to writhe with a life of their own. He could see why they called it Crime Alley. The back entrance to the Monarch Theater was boarded up, thick planks of wood nailed across the doorframe. According to Oracle's intel, this was a dead end. But the Shell Corporation had been active, money flowing through it like water. Something was happening here. He ran a hand over the boards, his fingers searching for a seam, a weakness. That's when he heard the sound. A soft, metallic click from the shadows behind him. It was the sound of a pistol's safety being disengaged. You're a long way from Bloodhaven, Goldilocks, a voice said, low and distorted by a helmet. And this part of the forest is full of wolves. Izuku froze, then slowly turned, his hands raised in a placating gesture. Standing at the mouth of the alley, silhouetted against the streetlights, was a figure he recognized instantly from the Batcomputer's files. He was tall, built like a brick wall, and clad in tactical armor, a brown leather jacket, and a striking, crimson helmet that was as iconic as it was terrifying. Red Hood. Jason Todd. The second Robin. The one who had died. The one who had come back wrong. Red Hood, Izuku said, his voice steady. I'm not looking for trouble. Yeah, well, in my neighborhood, trouble finds you, Jason replied, taking a slow step forward, the red light from his helmet's eyes glowing ominously. He held a customized, high-caliber pistol in a relaxed, expert grip. Oracle said you were sniffing around this address. I'm here to tell you to turn around and go play hero somewhere else. This is my hunt. The architect hurt your brother, Izuku said, lowering his hands slightly. He hurt your whole family. That makes it my hunt, too. Jason laughed, a harsh, grating sound. My family? That's rich, coming from the cuckoo who flew into the nest. You're not family. You're a temp, a stand-in they brought in because Bruce can't handle his grief like a normal person. You're a walking, talking coping mechanism. The words were cruel, designed to sting, and they did. But Izuku had faced worse. He had faced Kaken's explosive rage for years. This was just sad. Jason wasn't angry at him. He was angry at Bruce, at the world, at the hole in his own life that had been carved out with a crowbar. Call me what you want, Izuku said. But I'm not leaving. We're on the same side. No, we're not, Jason snarled, taking another step forward, the gun now leveled at Izuku's chest. See, you believe in second chances. You believe in talking it out, in giving sob stories a listen. My side, we believe in solutions. Permanent ones. He gestured with his gun to the boarded-up door. You'd knock politely. I'd use a shape charge. That's the difference between us, Sunshine. You're still playing by the rules of a game that's rigged against you. The rules are what separate us from them. Izuku countered, echoing a sentiment he'd heard from All Might 1,000 times. The rules are what get you killed! Jason roared, the sound echoing off the grimy brick walls. The rules are what let a maniac in a clown suit kill a kid in a warehouse in Ethiopia. So you can take your rules, and your goody two-shoes act, and you can get the hell out of my city. Izuku stood his ground. This isn't your city. It's everyone's. Wrong, Jason said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. This alley, this street, this whole damn forgotten borough, this is mine. And you are trespassing. He was about to say more when a new sound cut through the tense standoff. A high-pitched, electronic whine. Izuku's danger sense, which had been a low hum, suddenly spiked, screaming a frantic, high-alert warning. Get down! Izuku yelled, diving to the side. Jason, whose own instincts were honed by years of brutal survival, reacted a split second later. He threw himself into a roll as the boarded-up doorway they had been arguing in front of exploded outward. A wave of concussive force and splintered wood ripped through the alley. The blast was hot, powerful, and designed not to kill, but to disorient. Izuku landed hard, his head ringing. He pushed himself up, his vision swimming. Through the smoke and dust, he saw figures emerging from the now open doorway. There were at least a dozen of them, dressed in mismatched tactical gear, their faces hidden by gas masks. They were armed to the teeth with military-grade hardware, assault rifles, pulse cannons, weapons that had no business being on the streets of any city. Well, look what we have here, the lead figure said, his voice a metallic rasp through his mask speaker. A bird and a ghost. The architect sends his regards. Jason was already on his feet, his pistol barking twice. Two of the armored thugs dropped, clean headshots. Amateurs, he grunted, slamming a fresh clip into his gun. They telegraphed the ambush a mile away. They weren't trying to be subtle, Izuku said, pulling his eskrima sticks. They still felt awkward, but they were better than nothing. They were trying to pin us in. He was right. More armed men were appearing on the rooftops above them, blocking their only escape route. They were surrounded, trapped in the narrow confines of the alley. A kill box. Stay out of my way, kid! Jason snarled, opening fire on the men on the roof. His shots were brutally efficient, each one finding its mark. He was a master of violent geometry, using ricochets and suppressing fire to keep their heads down. Izuku moved to engage the group pouring out of the theater. He ducked under a wild spray of automatic fire, the bullets sparking against the brick wall behind him. He closed the distance, his movements a blur. He swept the legs out from under one gunman, then used the man's falling body as a springboard to launch himself at another. He slammed his eskrima stick into the man's rifle, knocking it aside, and followed up with a precise jab to the nerve cluster in his neck. The man went down, twitching, but there were too many of them. For every one he took down, two more stepped up. They weren't skilled, but they were organized and heavily armed. They fought like a unit, laying down overlapping fields of fire, forcing Izuku and Jason back to back in the center of the alley. They're trying to box us in. Wear us down! Jason yelled over the cacophony of gunfire. He had ditched his pistols for a pair of submachine guns he'd pulled from his jacket, laying down a storm of lead. Their armor is too thick! Izuku shouted back. Blunt force isn't effective enough! He had cracked 2 ribs on one of the thugs, and the man had just grunted and kept coming. A pulse cannon on the roof fired. A ball of crackling blue energy slammed into the ground where Izuku had been a second before, blasting a crater in the asphalt. The heat washed over him, singeing the edges of his cape. They were being systematically dismantled. Jason was a whirlwind of lethal force, but even he couldn't kill them all before they were overwhelmed. Izuku was doing his best to disarm and disable, but his non-lethal methods were too slow, too inefficient against this level of coordinated firepower. They needed an equalizer. They needed to change the game. Izuku looked at Jason. He saw the grim set of his jaw, the deadly efficiency of his movements. Jason was a killer because he believed it was the only way to win, the only way to survive. He believed that holding back was a weakness. Izuku had to show him that true strength, the greatest strength, came not from the willingness to kill, but from the power to control. The power to save everyone, even the enemy, from the cycle of violence. "Cover me!" Izuku yelled. "What for? You gonna talk them to death?" Jason retorted, firing another controlled burst that dropped a gunman trying to flank them. "Something like that," Izuku said. He took a deep, centering breath. He closed his eyes, shutting out the chaos, the gunfire, the shouting. He reached inward, to that warm, flickering ember of one for all. But he didn't just grasp at its power. He sought out a specific thread, a darker, more volatile energy that he had only recently begun to understand. The quirk of the fifth user, Daigoro Banjo. He opened his eyes. They were glowing with a faint, green light. "What the hell are you doing, kid?" Jason grunted, reloading. "My rules," Izuku said, and then he unleashed it. Black Whip. It didn't erupt from him in a chaotic explosion. This was controlled, deliberate. From his back, his arms, his shoulders, dozens of tendrils of pure, black energy erupted into the alley. They were not solid. They were semi-sentient things, crackling with green-black energy, moving with a snake-like, impossible speed. The effect was instantaneous and shocking. The entire dynamic of the fight was shattered in a single moment. A tendril shot out and wrapped around the barrel of an assault rifle just as it was firing, yanking it skyward. Another lashed out like a striking cobra, ensnaring the wrist of a man about to throw a grenade, crushing the detonator in his hand before painfully squeezing his wrist until he dropped it. More whips shot out, not as bludgeoning weapons, but as intricate, grasping limbs. They moved with a terrifying precision. One wrapped around a gunman's ankle, yanking him off his feet. Another coiled around a man's chest and arms, pinning him to the wall like a fly in a spider's web, squeezing the air from his lungs until he passed out. The men on the rooftops were not spared. Black, energetic ropes shot up the sides of the buildings, faster than any grapple hook. They wrapped around pulse cannons, ripping them from their mounts. They ensnared gunmen, plucking them from their perches and depositing them in a writhing, incapacitated pile in the middle of the alley. It was a symphony of controlled, non-lethal chaos. In the space of 10 seconds, a dozen heavily armed combatants were disarmed, immobilized, and utterly defeated without a single life-threatening blow being struck. Izuku stood in the center of it all, a silent puppet master, his arms outstretched, the black tendrils an extension of his will. The air crackled with residual energy. The green glow in his eyes slowly faded. The alley fell silent, the only sound the pained groans of the defeated thugs and the soft hiss of the rain. Jason Todd stood frozen, his submachine guns lowered. He stared at the scene, his mind struggling to process what he had just witnessed. He had seen magic, aliens, gods. He had walked in pits that brought men back from the dead. But he had never seen anything like this. The kid hadn't just fought. He had dominated. He had wielded a power that was terrifying in its scope, a power that could have ripped every man in the alley limb from limb. It could have been a massacre, but it wasn't. It was clean. Surgical. Controlled. He looked at Izuku, who was now panting, leaning against a wall for support. The power had clearly taken a toll on him. And Jason saw him in a new light. This wasn't some naive, idealistic choir boy. This was a soldier. A soldier with a weapon of mass destruction who chose to use it as a scalpel. He wasn't weak because he refused to kill. He was strong. Impossibly, terrifyingly strong, because he had the power to kill and actively, deliberately, chose not to. The mockery, the condescension, the anger, it all evaporated from Jason, replaced by a single, overwhelming emotion. He slowly walked over to Izuku, holstering his weapons. He looked at the web of black energy holding one of the thugs suspended a foot off the ground. The man was conscious, his eyes wide with terror. What was that? Jason asked, his voice stripped of its usual bravado. It was a genuine question. A quirk, Izuku said, his breathing evening out. It's called Black Whip. He retracted the tendrils, which flowed back into his body as if they were never there. The thugs all fell to the ground in an unconscious heap. Jason was quiet for a long moment. He looked at the pile of defeated enemies, then back at the exhausted boy in the Nightwing suit. He thought of his own methods, the bullets, the bombs, the bodies. his path of red. Then he looked at what Izuku had just done. A path of black, but one that left everyone breathing. He finally let out a low whistle. Damn, Sunshine. You got some messed up rules. He walked over to one of the unconscious thugs and kicked him, checking to see if he was faking. The man just groaned. Jason knelt and ripped the mask off the lead thug, the one who had spoken. He didn't recognize the face. Just another hired gun. But there was a small tattoo on his neck, a stylized architect's compass. Well, Jason said, pulling a pair of zip cuffs from his belt and starting to secure the prisoners. Looks like your brand of crazy actually works. Izuku gave him a small, tired smile. Sometimes. Jason stood up and clapped a heavy, armored hand on Izuku's shoulder. The gesture was surprisingly gentle. All right, you made your point. But don't think this makes us friends. He looked around the alley, at the carnage, at the crater from the pulse cannon. The architect is playing a different game. This wasn't just an ambush. It was a test. He wanted to see what the new Nightwing could do. He leaned in closer, his helmet's red eyes boring into Izuku's mask. I got a piece of advice for you, kid. Something I learned the hard way. His voice was low, serious, all traces of mockery gone. The people we fight, the real monsters, they're not just trying to cause chaos. They're not just trying to kill us. He tapped a finger against his own chest, then gestured vaguely towards the distant, glittering towers of downtown Gotham where Wayne Tower stood. They're trying to break the Bat's spirit. They're targeting our symbols. They're targeting our hope. The words hung in the air, a grim prophecy. This wasn't just a war for the streets of Gotham. It was a war for its soul, and Izuku Midoriya, the boy from another world, was now standing on the front lines, wearing the uniform of the city's brightest symbol. He had proven his strength to the Red Hood, but the real test, the one for the heart of the city, was yet to come.